Hi, this is Scott Grant. I'm here in our studio in beautiful downtown Ponte Vedra Beach with Jennifer Price and with our guest today, Billee Bussard. And Billee, I am absolutely ecstatic to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, and I'm enjoying telling the story again and again and again.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're known for having met the Beatles when the Beatles came here to play the Gator Bowl in 1964. And that's kind of what you're best known for, is that right?
Unfortunately, yes, but I am soon to be 75, so watch out for the next chapter.
That's exciting. I'm looking forward to that next chapter as well. And so you feel like sometimes you wish you were remembered for other things besides meeting the Beatles. And you were a kid when you met them practically, right?
Yeah, I was just 19 years old, and it was really fluke circumstances that led to that special time.
And then the rest of your life, people have been asking you about it.
Everybody. I mean, it's almost like people are mesmerized by the story, and it somehow has helped me advance my career and my whole life story. It's just amazing.
Well, I'm one of those people who is mesmerized by the story. I got to tell you, I love the story, and we're going to get to the story of how you meet the Beatles. But at that time, you were working for the local newspapers, the Times-Union and the Jacksonville Journal. Is that right?
I was working for the Jacksonville Journal. I was hired right out of high school. I had been the Andrew Jackson school page correspondent and was named school correspondent of the year, and they needed a city desk clerk, and at the time I had a job waiting for me with the telephone company, but I took a $5 a week pay cut to $50 to work on the newspaper, which is something I had always dreamed about since I read my first Nancy Drew book.
Oh, good move.
That is a great move. And a lot of kids in those days grew up dreaming about working on newspapers or in publishing houses, even going a little further back. Today, they all want to be YouTube stars. Nobody wants to work for the newspapers anymore. In fact, I sometimes speak to younger kids groups, and one of the questions I'll ask at some point, because we'll be talking about the events in 1964, is whether they know what a newspaper is.
Yeah, the media, unfortunately, has changed dramatically, but as the recent exposés in the Times-Union has revealed on the attempt to sell JEA, they still play a vital role in this community.
Oh, I agree. I think the news media, although it's changed, we kind of need the old news media. We need Billee Bussard and the old Times-Union crew back to investigate some of these stories.
Well, she said she didn't even know who you were because if she did, she would have read it in the paper.
Oh, that's interesting. That's true too. Coming in, well, she kind of knows who I am, but I don't think she knew that I was doing so many of these different kinds of things. So we're going to go to a break in a minute, but I want to tease the next segment. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about that Beatles show in 1964 right here at the Gator Bowl. And now we're going to hear some music Mike's going to put together for us, and we'll be right back.
We get it almost every night, and when that moon gets so big and bright, it's a supernatural delight. Everybody was dancing in the moonlight. Everybody here is out of sight, but they don't bark and they don't bite. They keep things loose, they keep things alive. Everybody was dancing in the moonlight, dancing in the moonlight. Everybody's feeling warm and bright. It's such a fine and natural sight. Everybody dancing in the moonlight. We like our fun and we never fight. You can't dance
Hi, this is Scott Grant. I'm here with Jennifer Price and Billee Bussard.
Hello.
Hi. Hi,
Hey.
Billy. And we're in our studio in downtown Ponte Vedra Beach, and we're talking about the Beatles. And what I wanted to do, we do history on the show, and I wanted to kind of set the stage. So what's going on in 1964 is that the Beatles are in England, and they're waiting to come to America, and they're not going to come to America until they have a number one hit. And they achieved that in January of 1964 with the song I Want to Hold Your Hand. And that's the Beatles' first hit in the United States. And it's a cute song.
It's so much sweeter than what we have today.
It's innocent. You think about some of the rap lyrics today versus I Want to Hold Your Hand. It's a simple thought. And the song's translated into almost every language in the world. It's the first kind of just super international hit, and it brings the Beatles to the United States. And so they come, and most people know that they come in February of 1964 and that they're on the Ed Sullivan Show. And that propels them into this greater fame. What I think a lot of people don't know is that they're on the Ed Sullivan Show in New York on February the 9th. And the very next week, February 16th, they make a second appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show live in Miami Beach from the Deauville Resort. Did you know that, Billy?
I vaguely recall it.
And those two shows are the number one and number two shows in terms of percentage of Americans watching it in all of history. So the Beatles are set. They do a concert at Carnegie Hall, and they do another concert in Washington at Griffith Stadium, and they go back to England, and they prepare for the big tour. What's really what we start to think of as the British invasion, which begins in August of 1964. They come, they play 28 cities in 33 days. And one of those cities is Jacksonville. They're going to play the Gator Bowl on September 11th. And that's a big day in Jacksonville history. The concert was sponsored by a radio station, local radio station called WAPE, the Big Ape. Do you remember that one, Billy?
I do.
They're still around, right?
Oh, yeah.
But they were a big deal back in the 60s.
Yes.
And part of the reason they were a big deal is they had a 50,000 watt water-cooled tower. And that thing could be heard all up and down the East Coast. And with that power, they were able to sell tickets. Mm-hmm. So the owner of WAPE, who was out of Birmingham, pays $50,000 to have the Beatles come to the Gator Bowl. And he begins advertising it. And people buy tickets, and the tickets are $4 and $5. They sell about 35,000 tickets.
Wow.
It's just fascinating. And 50,000 is fascinating, too, don't you think, Jennifer?
I want the $5 ticket.
Yeah, so do I. I want one. They sell them every once in a while on the internet. By the way, they cost a lot more than $5
I
now.
bet.
So, but there's a problem. As you recall, Billy, there's a problem. And the problem is that the Gator Bowl is segregated.
Yeah.
And the Beatles do not want to play to a segregated audience. John Lennon says that he would sooner give up his appearance money than come here. And so throughout the tour, as they're going to city, this comes up periodically. And the Beatles keep saying, we don't want to play to a segregated crowd.
Now, part of the reason is because they credited the influence of black musicians in England on their own music. And Mick Jagger, I think, similarly.
Now, you think both the Rolling Stones and the Beatles had, Elvis was an influence, but a lot of black musicians.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'll jump ahead. Ultimately, they will play the Gator Bowl, and they open here with the song "Roll Over Beethoven," which is written by Chuck Berry. So that was their opening song in Jacksonville, and I think it's the only time they had it as their opening song, and I think it was designed as sort of a thumbing of the nose. But in any event, week before the show at the Gator Bowl, the Beatles come out in a press release and say, they won't come unless African Americans and whites are allowed to sit wherever they want. Mm-hmm. And the city, I guess, relents. And do you recall those events occurring? I mean, the city, was there pressure put on the city? But the city changes its mind and allows this show to be desegregated or integrated.
I'm not sure the Journal ever ran a story about that, or the Times-Union. Did you ever find a story about that in the Times-Union?
No.
I don't think I was aware of that until later. And so, the paper at that time, they had a publisher who really tried to suppress a lot of the civil rights actions going on. And in fact, my late husband defied the publisher when he was city editor by publishing stories about the riots downtown. And at the time, he was a divorced father who had to support 2 children. So it was a very sad chapter in the leadership in this community, especially the newspaper.
Well, I know with a lot of these things that the Times Union didn't want to cover them. I mean, that's always part of the story. And people from here will say to me sometimes, not so much with the Beatles, but with other civil rights events, that they didn't even know what was going on.
Yeah.
And I'll say, well, this picture ran in every newspaper in the world, and somebody will raise their hand and say, well, it wasn't in my paper. And I'll say, well, yeah, I'm sorry, it ran in every paper in the world except here.
Yeah.
In here being more generally the South than just Jacksonville. But that's interesting. You didn't even know. And no, I don't run across a lot. There were editorials written largely negative about the Beatles leading into the show, and people were upset. I think they were viewed as interlopers. And I think people were upset they were coming here and telling us, how to arrange the seating at our stadium.
Mm-hmm.
They were what I consider music's first advocates.
Well, a lot of people say that. I don't know if they were the first, but they were certainly a major one. And they were certainly a major one on this issue because, as we know, after this tour, they changed their contract. And in the contract, it says they won't play before a segregated
That's
crowd.
Right.
Also worth noting that the Civil Rights Act had been signed into law in July, so segregation was illegal. So they were fighting something that was actually already illegal.
Yeah. I mean, certainly what they did was groundbreaking for this city and forced city fathers to stand up and take notice of their policies, the discriminatory policy.
Well, that's great.
Wish you peace, and I wish you well. Peace to the world, peace for yourself. And I wish you love, and I wish you friends fairly well till we meet again. When I lay my head the pillow down and I say a little prayer for the world going round. You, my friend, will be on my mind. May the human race treat each other kind. And I wish you peace, and I wish you well. To the world, peace for yourself. And I wish you love, and I wish you friends fairly well till we meet again. May we bury all the arms in our children's time. Could we just stand for basic human rights? Learn to feed all the growing little minds. We pray for peace
was a dirty word, a day when the earth's cries can be finely heard, when integrity is a synonym for wealth. A community is to your help, and I wish you peace, and I wish you well. Peace to the world, peace for yourself, and I wish you love, and I wish you friends very well. Till we meet again, and I wish you peace, and I wish you well. Peace to the world, peace for yourself, and I wish you love, and I wish you friends very well. Till we meet again.
Hi, this is Scott Grant. I'm here in our studio, the Stand Fast studio, with Jennifer Price. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi.
And Billee Bussard,
Hey.
who's our special guest, who met the Beatles, which is just an amazing event. So the Beatles come, they get here on September 11th. They're diverted by this hurricane. I guess we didn't even mention there was a hurricane in this story, but there's a hurricane the day before the show. And they show up the day of the show, and they go to the George Washington Hotel. And they don't check in. And they don't check in because there's no room for the African-American opening acts. So they never go to the rooms, but they do have a press conference in the ballroom.
No room, or they won't.
They don't check into the room. Actually, either Harrison or Lennon, I think it's one of the guys says there was no room for us.
Well, there's plenty of rooms.
And then
I'm sure.
George Harrison said, yes, that's unfortunate. There are plenty of rooms for the Beatles. There weren't any rooms for the Exciters or Frogman Henry or any of the African-American opening acts that day. The George Washington Hotel was still segregated, and while the Beatles had desegregated the Gator Bowl, they hadn't thought about the George Washington Hotel.
Wasn't that against the law at this time?
Yeah, as we said, it was against the law. The Civil Rights Act had been passed, and it's very specifically mentioned accommodations as a place you couldn't discriminate.
Well,
Wow.
something had to be going on because I accidentally came upon them in the elevator, a back elevator in the George Washington, that was going up.
Yeah.
And
Now I love the story. Just I can come back to it. But you're there for the press conference, right?
I was told to stay behind the scenes and wander the halls of the hotel while the veteran reporter covered the press conference. So I was to find little tidbits, maybe look for fans doing crazy things, and so I stayed in the periphery of the
Okay.
press conference.
And so you're there, and you're walking around the George Washington Hotel. Now tell us what happens. And this is one of the greatest stories I've ever heard. I just alerting the audience.
So I wandered the hallways, and I decided to go down this hallway in the back of the hotel, and I pressed the elevator. And at the time, I was 19, but I was pretty innocent and shy. And I walk into the elevator with my head down, and the doors closed behind me, and I put my head up, and there is the whole Beatle entourage. Now, mind you, I was not a Beatle fan at the time, but I knew this.
You knew who they were, yeah.
I was special, and I found myself at a loss for words. So I quickly turn around, and I quickly press the button to exit on the next floor. And
my goodness.
Which I think stunned them all. And I had my press credentials on, so they had to be wondering, who is this idiot? And maybe they were insulted, thinking I snubbed them or something. And maybe that's why I wound up landing the interview that night. I don't know.
Well, that's fascinating. So you were at a loss for words. You were just overcome, even though you weren't a Beatles fan. but overcome being in the elevator with John Paul.
Yeah, and I can remember thinking to myself, would it be rude to try to interview them on the elevator? You know, because I was a wet behind the ear cub reporter and actually a city desk clerk who had been sent with the veteran reporter because he was so shorthanded for reporters because of the trifecta of news stories happening, and that's the
let's talk about that.
Yeah.
What's
Trifecta.
I like the
I like
trifecta. Well, what was the trifecta again that day?
Well, the hurricane had hit.
And
President
that's
John, yeah,
Hurricane Dora.
yeah, that was and then President Johnson was coming to town to survey the damage, and the Beatles, and there were just not enough bodies to do justice to all the stories. So I was told to go out. I mean, I had a little history as writing stories, having been a school page correspondent. So I guess they had faith in me.
Yeah,
What
so,
do you think-
so you went from writing school news to writing about the Beatles.
Yeah, well, yeah, but that was about a year later.
Okay.
What do you think the number one story of that day would have been considered?
I think President Johnson coming to town, but certainly I think the Beatles and them standing up to the segregation probably historically was the big
historically.
story.
But I think at the time, I think you're right. I think LBJ was the big story. And I know a guy on Channel 4 interviews John Lennon, and one of the questions he asked John Lennon is, did you know the president was here? And John Lennon is very unimpressed. It's interesting just to watch. He's like, he doesn't care that LBJ was there. So I sometimes say, we're running out of time in this segment, but I sometimes say that that day, September 11th, 1964, is the biggest day in the history of the Jacksonville News. And you're a reporter. You've seen a lot. Is that a true statement, do you think? Is that the biggest day ever?
Yeah, I think so. But it certainly was a defining moment for the city as far as segregation goes.
Oh yeah, for sure. And we desegregated the Gator Bowl, and I think that's something that fondly remember the Beatles for. All right, we're going to take a break. We will be back with more, and you have more stories from.
Singing his song. All the little birds on Jaybird Street love to hear the robin go tweet, tweet, tweet. Rockin' Robin, tweet, tweet, rockin' Robin, tweet, tweet. Slow rockin' Robin, 'cause we really gonna rock 'em tonight. Every little swallow, every chickadee, every little bird in the tall oak tree. The wise or loud, the big black crow, flap of their wings, sing and go, bird, go. Rockin' Robin, tweet, tweet, rockin' Robin, tweet, tweet. Slow rockin' Robin, 'cause we're really gonna rock tonight. A pretty little raven at the birdman stand, talking about the pop and it was grand. They started going steady and bless my soul. He outpopped the buzzard and the oriole. He rocks in the treetop all the day long, popping and a popping and a singing his song. All the little birds on Jaybird Street love to hear the robin go tweet, tweet, tweet. Rockin' Robin, tweet, tweet, rockin' Robin, tweet, tweet. Slow rockin' Robin, 'cause we're really gonna rock tonight. Well, the pretty little raven at the birdman stand taught him how to do the pop and it was grand. They started going steady and bless my soul. He outpopped the buzzard and the oriole. He rocks in the treetop all the day long, hopping and a bopping and a singing his song. All the little birds on Jaybird Street love to hear the robin go tweet, tweet, tweet. Rockin' Robin, tweet, tweet, rockin' Robin, tweet. Slow rockin' Robin, 'cause we're really gonna rock tonight.
Hi, Scott Grant here, and I am in our recording studios in beautiful downtown Ponte Vedra Beach with Jennifer Price. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi.
And Billee Bussard.
Howdy.
And Billee was there at the Beatles show in 1964. And so they finished the concert at the George Washington Hotel, and they all get driven to the Gator Bowl in the back seat of a 1963 Ford GT 500. I think that's right. And they're all in the back seat. There's this picture, which always fascinates me, the idea of John, Paul, George, and Ringo all in the back seat of a mid-sized car. I mean, it wasn't like they were going there in a Lincoln Continental. But that picture does fascinate me. So then when they get to the stadium, there's another problem. And you were talking about that in the break. And tell us about that problem. They had desegregated the Gator Bowl, but now there's another obstacle. Is that right?
Yeah, I was assigned to stay behind the scenes of the stage. The stage has been set up on bleachers, and so I was underneath the bleachers. And there had been some ruckus, and there was a delay in the concert starting, and I wasn't quite sure what it was all about. And I decided to go to this trailer, which I later learned was where the Beatles had stayed before the show started. And I knocked on the door, and the door opens, and it is their road manager. And he says, "It's you. What do you want?"
So he remembered you from the elevator.
Obviously, I made an impression with my beehive hairdo and bottle red hair that was down to my butt. And I said, "Well, I'm just trying to find a story that nobody else has, and I want to know what's going on." And he says, "Okay, see that pole over there? Stand there. Don't ask any questions. Do it, I tell you, and I'll get you a good story."
Wow.
Oh, wow. And they say, you said bottle red, and they say Paul McCartney had an affinity for redheads. Is that true?
That's what I later read when I was doing research for a Folio Weekly story that I did on the 50th anniversary of interviewing them.
That sounds like a movie.
And what was the controversy now? The controversy was over...
Well, there were foreign journalists filming their concerts, and they did not give them permission, and they said they would not perform if they weren't thrown out of the stadium, and they were.
Yeah, in fact, I think the Jacksonville police, or may have been called Duval at that time, escorted those guys out. They were there with cameras, and they were making essentially a bootleg film of the Beatles tour. They've been following these guys around.
Yeah, and they sold it. They sold the footage.
Yeah, and it was and it was valuable footage.
Yeah.
It was. You should have had your camera.
I wonder if there's any of that still floating around.
I don't. There's not much footage. I have 35 seconds of footage from that concert. I've had one woman tell me that she videotaped it from her seat, and I asked to see it. I asked to protect it, and like many people, she felt she had a treasure. She may. And didn't want to share that treasure with anybody. She's going to sell it.
It needs a safe place.
That was my argument to her. Was more, it needs a safe place because you've got it on 1964 film, and that's not going to last for forever. But yeah, she thinks she wants to sell it, and I suspected in talking to her that her price tag was more than I was able to pay. I think she was looking for a big payday. So they escort him out, and then the Beatles come on. And they play. And as I said earlier, they open with the song "Roll Over Beethoven." They play 12 songs in 35 minutes. Their opening acts: the Exciters, Frogman Henry, and Jackie DeShannon. You remember Jackie DeShannon?
I hate to tell you, but I was a pop culture illiterate. My life as a teenager was not the usual life of most kids. I hardly knew the Beatles songs.
Well, you were writing news stories and preparing to be a journalist.
Yeah, sort of.
So do you remember the concert? Do you remember anything about the concert other than you were now excitedly waiting for this opportunity that had been promised you?
I just remember a lot of noise, and I remember foot stomping when they were late getting performing because it was delayed. I do remember that. And the interesting thing is, I had gone to the Gator Bowl with a veteran reporter who was actually covering the concert, and I was relying on him for transportation, so I didn't know how I was going to get back or anything if I didn't connect with him. And as it turned out, after the concert was over, up comes this parade of limousines, and the door is open, and I'm shoved in there, and said, with apparently press from other that had traveled with them, and I didn't know where I was going, and of course it wasn't the day of cell phones, so I didn't know how to get in touch with the reporter, who was Bill Scrimshire at the time, and
And so they shoved you in, and were you in the car with the entourage or with actual Beatles?
No, I was with other
reporters.
Other reporters, and the Beatles, supposedly they were in some of the limos ahead of us, although somebody has written that they thought they pulled a fast one and wound up going in a pickup truck to the airport. But that came out after my folio story, but I've never been able to track that story down.
I've never heard that story either. Unfortunately, we got to stop. We'll come back and we'll hear about this trip to the airport.
Sugar, oh honey, honey, you are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you, honey, oh sugar, sugar, you are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you. I just can't believe the loveliness of loving you. I just can't believe it's true. I just can't believe the wonder of this feeling too. I just can't believe it's true. Ah, sugar. Oh, honey, honey. You are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you. Sugar, you are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you. When I kissed you, girl, I knew how sweet a kiss could be. I know how sweet a kiss can be. Like the summer sunshine, pour your sweetness over me. Pour your sweetness over me. Oh, sugar, sugar on me, honey.
Hi, Scott Grant here, and I'm in the studio with Jennifer Price. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, we're downtown.
Yeah, downtown, beautiful downtown Ponte Vedra Beach. Did you know that that's where you were, Billee?
Oh, I did indeed. I've been down here many times.
Well, this is the center of Ponte Vedra Beach. And we're also here with Billee Bussard, who's our special guest, and we're thrilled to have her. And you met the Beatles, and in the last segment we were talking about, you got put into a limo to head out to the airport with the other reporters.
And I didn't know I was heading out to the airport. I didn't know where I was going, actually.
They just put you in a car.
Yeah.
You're 19 years old, and they throw you in a car. What would your mother have thought?
Oh, she'd been furious.
You must have been scared to death with your stage fright.
No, I really wasn't. I was just kind of curious. But what frightened me most was, as we exited the Gator Bowl, was the throng of fans surrounding the cars and all these hands around the windows. I felt like octopus were all over us, you know.
Wow.
And I kind of felt empathy for performers as a result of that experience.
So the fans mobbed your car.
Like zombies.
They were looking for the Beatles.
Right. I presume they weren't looking for you. They were looking for John or
Yeah.
Paul or George or Ringo. But
Yeah.
still, that's got to be an interesting experience. And so then you drive and you don't know where you're going.
That's right. And they took back roads to the airport, which was then Imeson Airport, which is now an industrial park. And mind you that these back roads were some were very winding roads, and also with trees down because we just had the hurricane. So it was kind of like being on a roller coaster in some places. But the scariest part was when we were winding around the Evergreen Cemetery, and which has a huge brick wall that meanders for miles, and all of a sudden out of a side street comes this car speeding right in between the motorcade, and had it been a split second difference, some of us might have been killed in an auto accident. The people were maniacs, and I've often thought, it could have ended for the Beatles that night, or for me.
Wow.
Wow, it could have ended for the Beatles or for you. I think somebody was looking out for you. I think they wanted you to be here today to tell this story, right?
You have to believe there's a reason for everything.
That's true. So you get to the airport, and what happens?
Well, they pull. I'm on the tarmac, and they pull up to the stairs going up to the plane, and here comes the road manager, and he escorts me up into the plane. I still didn't know what I was going to be doing, and the plane is empty except all the way in the back is Ringo and George Harrison walking around in their underwear, and yes, they were briefs, I guess I should call them. Not briefs. What do you call the short
Briefs.
ones?
I think brief is a good description.
And there's John and Paul McCartney sitting in the middle of the plane looking at me and smiling. And as I walk up to Paul, he looks at me and he says, "You're a persistent little redheaded thing, aren't you?" And apparently I must have caught the attention of that crew, and they couldn't quite figure me out.
Well, you were probably the youngest and quite possibly the prettiest reporter in Jacksonville that day covering the Beatles, right?
Probably.
That's fascinating. So a persistent little redheaded thing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. I like that.
And I guess that really defines me, actually.
I would agree with that statement.
Persistent, anyway.
You got their attention.
Yeah.
And so did you interview John and Paul?
Yeah, I did. But George and Ringo stayed in the back the whole time. And again, because I was so ignorant about pop culture and the Beatles music, I really didn't know what to ask. And so, I'm floundering around for things to ask them, and I came out with a bunch of inane questions, including I asked, "What do you like to wear when you're not performing?" And, instead of their signature jackets and stuff. And of course, John Lennon, being the comic that he was, he said, "Well, frankly, I like to wear bra and panties."
Oh, my goodness.
And so, of course, they could see I was pretty wet behind the ears, and I'm sure I turned all shades of red, and they had a good time with that.
They loved being irreverent.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I asked a couple of other stupid questions. I think I had them about 15 minutes to myself before apparently the competing morning paper, the Times-Union, found out about it, and they were making noise about me being on the plane, and they were not getting to interview. So, but I got the exclusive interview, and they never put anything in the paper about their interview the next day because, being the afternoon paper, my story was on the front page the next day. So,
Front page.
That's great. Do you remember anything else you asked him?
no.
Okay, that's all right.
Not
that's all right.
today. I didn't have time to read
That's
my
all right.
notes.
That's all right. But 15 minutes alone.
Yeah.
So you were the envy of every schoolgirl
Yeah.
in America.
And the story got picked up by the Associated Press and ran in lots of other papers. And I was actually getting calls for, days after from around the country from girls asking, what were they really, really like? And did you really, really interview them? And, so I had no idea what an accomplishment that was.
So you had an instant celebrity status.
Yeah. And not only that, but I caught the attention of the managing editor, who told the city editor that he should start giving me more serious stories to write because he was so impressed. And the city editor was so impressed with me that 4 years later he married me.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I think I did know that. That's a cute story, isn't it? So just one more thing, and then we're going to go to break. George Harrison and Ringo Starr were in their underwear, and I think you said briefs, and I think you actually mean boxers.
Boxers,
Boxers.
not
I want to just make sure the whole.
I'm still innocent.
I may want to make sure that the crowd out there isn't picturing
Yes.
George and Ringo in their briefs.
I was picturing briefs. Thanks for correcting my vision.
Boxers, which was very modest. I would have freaked out with briefs.
And do you think that? I mean, they knew you were there, right?
Yeah.
So were they doing that for your benefit, or they just didn't care?
They would just engage. I mean, it was far enough in the back of the plane, that.
But essentially, you were there on a plane alone with the Beatles.
Right.
Wow, that's just amazing. We got to take a break. Mike's going to play some music, and we will be back with more.
I thought love was only true in fairy tales, and for someone else, but not for me. Our love was out to get me. That's the way it seemed. Disappointment haunted all my dreams. Then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer. Not a trace of doubt in my mind. I'm in love. I'm a believer. I couldn't leave her if I tried. I thought love was more or less a given thing. Seems the more I gave, the less I got. What's the use in trying? All you get is pain. When I needed sunshine, I got rain. Oh, then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer. Not a trace of doubt in my mind. I'm in love. I'm a believer. I couldn't leave her if I tried. That's the way it seemed. Disappointment haunted all my dreams. Oh, then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer. Not a trace of doubt in my mind. I'm in love. I'm a believer. I couldn't leave her if I tried. Yes, I saw her face. Now I'm a believer. I'm not a trace of doubt in my mind. Said I'm a believer, yeah, 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 yeah. Said I'm a believer, yeah, I'm a believer.
Hi, Scott Grant here in our studios in beautiful downtown Ponte Vedra Beach. I'm here with Jennifer Price.
Hello.
And our guest today is Billee Bussard, and she's been telling us about the Beatles. This has been fascinating, Billee. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me, and I'm just fascinated by your depth and breadth of Beatles history.
Well, certain things capture my attention, and once they do, I'm like you, fairly relentless in pursuing them. And I definitely have spent a lot of time researching the Beatles here in Florida, both the trip to Miami to be on the Ed Sullivan Show and this trip that brings them to Jacksonville. And part of that story we didn't talk about real briefly is that because of the hurricane, they get diverted. They're supposed to be here for a couple of days, and they get diverted to Key West. And they end up spending a day in Key West and getting very drunk. So they were hungover when they arrived in Jacksonville. That actually I don't talk about this much, but one of the things we know that the George Washington Hotel was segregated, and oftentimes that hurricane is credited with almost canceling the show. But I sort of think that in addition, that hurricane may have saved the show, because the Beatles were supposed to spend a couple days here in Jacksonville, and I've often wondered What would have happened had they shown up at the George Washington Hotel 2 days early and been told there was no room for the African American opening acts? Would they have stayed around for 2 days waiting, or would they have just said, "Hey, we've had enough"?
I don't think so. I think they had enough conviction about civil rights that they probably
Would have left
moved on. Yeah.
and not played. So the hurricane, as much as we talk about the hurricane almost stopping that show, it may have saved that show.
Yeah.
And so this event makes you sort of a national celebrity and catapults
Temporarily, for a day or two.
Well, even today, well, 50,
We're still talking about
we're
it.
55 years later, we're still talking about it. And it launched your career. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, and it really was life-changing for me. And I've been a journalist almost 25 years in Jacksonville, and my last job was a full-time job at the Times-Union, was editorial page writer. And after I left in 2000, I did a lot of Folio Weekly pieces, mostly focusing on politics. And that brought me to my decision to run for office for state senate in 2018 because of what I knew was really going on in North Florida and the changes that needed to be made.
And I'm really proud of you for running. Now, you were a Democrat.
Yeah,
And you ran in a Republican district.
that's right.
And you never had a chance from the beginning.
Oh, I knew it was a suicide mission. But talk about hurricanes. The house I had lived in for 42 years flooded twice within 11 months of each other as a result of Irma and the other, Michael, was there, which one?
Well, yeah, I think it's right, Irma and Michael.
And I just decided that at age 73, then I couldn't handle another hurricane. And I put my house on the market and I moved inland. But I'm still on a lake. So, I decided I had money left over from the sale of my house, and I jumped in at the 11th hour, and I figured I could handle 4 months of campaigning, and just to try to raise awareness to the people of Jacksonville about elements in this community that are serving special interests to their detriment. And what I wanted to tell you is that I'm not through, and the next chapter in my life is going to be a website that will be launched in February that will document how policies supported by certain politicians serve special interests to the detriment of the rest of us. So watch for that.
Well, and I don't think there's any question. Everybody believes there's special interests. It's just everybody picks out different special interests to point the finger at.
Well, I'm talking
and
about,
that's our problem.
I'm talking about kitchen table things, or your utility bill,
Sure.
I mean, basic things like that people need to survive, and people don't realize how their pockets are being picked.
Oh, that's fascinating.
I want to know.
Yeah, I think inquiring minds do. But you're also working on a book, is that correct?
Yeah, and actually I started writing it several years ago, and this may be the year I finish it. I was
It's time.
yeah.
2020.
I think
No,
so
before
too.
I croak, I'll be 75 in August.
Well, hopefully you'll be around for a long time. And the book is about
It says how a Beatles interview changed my world, and and I want to incorporate some of the stuff that you talk about, Scott, because you certainly have a lot more depth of knowledge of some of the Beatles' background than I do. I just know what happened to me in Jacksonville that day.
well, thank you.
And,
And the story fascinates me. The two stories really were almost three, but the Beatles only come here to Florida as a group twice, and it's both those times are in 1964, which is a year that just interests me anyway. And you think about the Beatles being here. They were, I think John and Paul were 22. Mm-hmm. They were only a little bit older than you
that's
were.
right. Yeah, I thought about that.
So you guys were all kids in a time when the kids were
Ruling the world.
starting to take it over. Oh,
That had
and
to be scary.
does that sound familiar, Jennifer?
Kids ruling the world. Oh,
Does
I
that
just
sound
got
familiar to
chills.
you?
Oh, yeah. Well, it was interesting when I was doing research for a folio story that ran on the 50th anniversary of the Beatles being in Jacksonville, was looking at the background of Paul and John and their family life, and so much of the things that they went through paralleled what I had been going through at the time. And I think those things make you very insightful. So no matter what your challenge is as a young person, I think it's a lesson to be learned, and you come out better for it if you allow yourself to.
Well, that's a great sentiment, and maybe a good sentiment to end on, because we're running out of time. What I'd like you to do is to come back and have you come back and talk about the book. Let's get the book done. Jennifer, what do you say?
Yes.
Yes, I agree. I vote too. Let's get that book done.
Okay, months from now, but sooner the better.
Yeah, we will help you as much as you need, but I love the idea, and your story needs to be it needs to be recorded for posterity, because I don't know many people who have a story as fascinating as you do, Billee. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you.
The Scott Grant Show is brought to you by Standfast Asset Management of Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida. Standfast is a fiduciary asset manager specializing in great American companies. We're proud of our disciplined approach to investing.